Both these visionaries, these modern myth makers, will discuss the future of cinema, something both they and we have a stake in. We have had two revolutions in the history of cinema, that of sound and color. I think with 3D, we're just about on the verge of a third one. What sort of movies will hold us in thrall in the future? What will be the role of technology in a world where increasingly anything is possible? How can the world make movies that transcend borders? We live in a world of image overload, where we are inundated by visuals we cannot even comprehend. How do we continue to be moved by motion pictures? How do you make the universal exotic and the exotic universal? I can't think of two men who are better equipped to tell us how to communicate this to a global audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite now Mr. James Cameron to give us his thoughts on the future of cinema.
Thank you, Arun. Beautiful words. Now, I'm Mike, so I think I can just talk from anywhere. Arun already said almost everything I was going to say, so this may be very short. Just want to say to start, thank you for your gracious hospitality, and I think that the India Today Conclave is a wonderful event to bring people together, business and entertainment, and so on. And it's certainly a very distinct honor to share the stage with Amir Khan because certainly he is at the absolute top of his game, and I know that it's his birthday tomorrow, and he he chose to forego an evening tonight so that he could be here with us. So I'm especially honored by that. Ostensibly I'm going to speak about the future of cinema, and I could spout lots of numbers and facts about trends and the growth in the business internationally and so on. I'm not going to do all that because, first of all, I'd have to go look it up online, and you guys can do that too if you want to. I think I'll just tell you a little story about the making of Avatar, because it was a picture that took 4.5 years to make, so it spans a period in the entertainment industry where a lot has changed. And that those changes both affected Avatar, and I think Avatar may, to a certain extent, have affected some of those changes. But to tell you that story, I have to go way back in time to my childhood, and the moment that I became a lover of cinema. And really, what it was is that I was fascinated by a magic that I could not understand, that I could not explain. And I can think of some very distinct examples of this. The Ray Harryhausen films, the stop-motion animated films, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, where the skeletons come up out of the ground, and Mysterious Island. These were films that, to the eye, could not be explained. They were pure magic. And the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke's third law states that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I thought, I don't know how this was done, and I don't care, but I'm a fan for life. And of course, I love science fiction and fantasy, and later as I became a filmmaker, I worked in that genre. My first film was The Terminator, then I did Aliens, and I became a practitioner of that technique of visual effects, which was the sufficiently advanced technology that becomes indistinguishable from magic. And I loved that part of it. And an interesting thing happened on my third film, The Abyss, where, and Arun mentioned it, the water tentacle, which we called the pseudopod. I needed a very practical solution to a script problem, how to create this. And in the course of solving that problem, we wound up using CGI, as we called it at the time, computer-generated imagery. And I was completely inexperienced with that. And I have to remind everyone, this was only 22 years ago. And so much has changed in the 2 decades since, because now CG is very common and is used in most movies to some extent or another. But at the time, it was very exotic. And with The Abyss, we used the CG to create this soft surface character, and it was the first time that a soft surface character with facial expressions ever appeared in a feature motion picture. And I remember, even though the film didn't do well, it barely broke even, I remember the effect that this had on the audience. And it was really transformative because people were seeing something that was magical. They were seeing something that was as if in a dream, phantasmagorical, something surreal that looked real but couldn't possibly be real. And I really realized the power of CG to inspire the imagination of the audience. So I used it again quickly in Terminator 2. That was in 1991 for the Liquid Metal Man, which Arun mentioned. And of course, that film was wildly successful beyond our expectations. And I really realized that we were onto something. That this idea of the technology which can create magic in the mind of the audience is something that I needed to pursue. So I started a company called Digital Domain, and the purpose of that company was to pursue this idea of CG, to raise the art and the technology of computer animation and computer-generated imagery. So I worked in that company for a couple of years, and about 1995, I started to realize that I needed to challenge my guys at that company. I needed to throw down the gauntlet and say, let's not just build iteratively as the other companies are doing. Let's go beyond. Let's go one or two quantum steps beyond. So I wrote a story called Avatar, that was just chock full of creatures, characters, and phantasmagorical settings, floating mountains, and these tall blue people with the big golden eyes. And I knew at the time that we would create them using CG, but that it would be an actor-driven process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what happened was, as we broke it down and we looked at the plausibility of making this film at the time, we realized that it just wasn't possible, that we would need to wait a few years because the tide was slowly rising on CG. Many other filmmakers were pushing the technique forward, and I knew that eventually the industry would come up to a capability that might make it possible to make this movie. But I had gone too many quantum steps beyond what was possible at the time. So I made another little movie about a ship that sinks, and that took a couple of years. And in the wake of that film, I thought, let's do something really challenging. So I decided to commit myself to making documentary films, which turned, I think when we're making theatrical feature films, we sort of have an idea that documentary films they're kind of a second-class citizen. I found that they're very, very difficult, and they required just as much discipline. And we were doing deep ocean exploration for those films. But another thing that fascinated me is that in 1995, same year that I wrote Avatar, I also made a 3D film, and it was for a theme park attraction because there were no 3D theaters at that time. And the cameras were enormous. They were the size of refrigerators, and it was very, very difficult to shoot, but I actually really enjoyed the process. So in around 2000, I started to work with a technology partner named Vince Pace to build smaller scaled, more manageable digital cameras based on HD technology that could shoot 3D. I was fascinated by the idea of 3D, and I wanted to shoot with these cameras, and we could only show them in IMAX. That was the only way that you could show a 3D movie at that time. So we used the 3D cameras to make the documentary films over the next few years. And after the first few weeks of working with these cameras, I made a firm decision for myself that I would never go back to 2D again. I would never go back to film, and I would never go back to 2D. I was going to be digital all the way. I was going to be 3D all the way. And my reasons for that were that I felt that looking at the image on the screen that was coming from these cameras wasn't like watching a film. It was like looking through a window into a reality. And if I could get that kind of power into my fictional filmmaking, I believed I could do something much more extraordinary than anything I had done in the past. The only problem was there were no theaters. There were no theaters to show such a movie if we were to make one at that time. So I thought, I'll continue to work in the documentaries. Meanwhile, I'll get out and I'll evangelize to the exhibition community, to the theater owners, that they need to adopt this new technology. Because the digital projection technology that was just becoming available at that time was capable of supporting 3D. And my vision for what was going to happen was that there would be a digital cinema revolution, and that digital cinema would become the way we watch movies. And there were a lot of good economic reasons for that, because we spend a lot of money on release prints, and we spend, let's say, $1,500 for a photochemical release print, as opposed to $100 for a digital print. So we could slash these costs, which are maybe $1 billion worth of money spent on prints a year. We could slash it to a fraction of that. So the economics made sense. The problem was nobody wanted to move forward. They argued for years about standards and security and encryption and who was going to pay for it, who would benefit from it. So my vision that 3D would kind of ride in on the back of digital cinema wasn't happening. It wasn't happening with any meaningful forward progression. So I kept going out and telling the exhibitors, look guys, we can do something amazing here. Finally, I took the bull by the horns, and I got a couple of other filmmakers who had either made 3D films or who wanted to. And those were Bob Zemeckis and George Lucas, who wanted to convert his Star Wars films to 3D, Robert Rodriguez, and Peter Jackson, and myself. And we went and got up on a stage at Show West, which is a huge conclave of exhibitors, theater owners, and we stood there and we said, this revolution is happening. And that was in early 2005. And I actually think they listened, or they started to listen, because that year things started to change and more theaters started to get converted into digital cinema and so on. But it wasn't changing fast enough for me. I wanted thousands of these screens all over the world. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to have to make a movie, and it's got to be a big movie, and it's got to be exciting, and like the films that I've made in the past, science fiction, fantasy, something amazing, and we'll shoot it in 3D, and then they can't ignore it, because if they want this film, they want to book it in 3D and they want to be competitive, they're going to have to put in the screens. So I looked at all the various films that I had, and I remembered Avatar, which I hadn't thought of for 10 years. And I read the script, thought it was pretty good. So we actually started Avatar in May of 2005. And the first 2 years of working on Avatar consisted of two things, which were being developed in parallel. I had a team of artists, some of the best sketch artists in the world, creating creatures and plants and floating mountains and the Na'vi people, all the different characters. So there was the art team who were creating what everything would look like. And I had another team, and their job was to create the method by which we would create this world. And we developed a bunch of new technology, and again, this took 2 years to do. And I knew that the film would succeed or fail based on this, based on a tight close-up of these CG characters. Because if they didn't have the heart and the soul of a real person, even though they were CG, the film would have been a waste of time and money. And we looked at what was available at the time in terms of performance capture, and we decided to do it with performance capture. And the thing you have to remember about performance capture is it's not photography. There's no camera. It's done by capturing what the actor does, how the actor performs the scene. And there can be many actors in the scene, however many there would be in the final scene as you see it. But the camera work and the lighting and all that are all done separately and later. The actors don't have to be there for it. So it's a very interesting process from a director's standpoint.